I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation, professional football stars who make lots of money but also get into lots of trouble. Is there a connection to the game that made them famous and their legal issues? Here's the story. For decades, the NFL has thrilled millions, making players very rich and very popular. Yet, we have seen our share of gridiron stars right here on Court TV. Players and former players spiraling into legal trouble, shocking fans who once cheered their names. Violent outbursts, erratic behavior, and heartbreaking falls from grace have become tragically familiar. And increasingly, doctors point to one silent culprit lurking beneath those iconic helmets: CTE. The degenerative brain disease triggered by repeated hits has been discovered in the brains of dozens of former players whose lives unraveled long before death. Families recall sudden personality shifts, paranoia, explosive tempers, symptoms now linked to years of collisions. Is there a connection between the games we love to watch and the behavior that puts these stars in legal jeopardy? And during the course of this hour, we're going to take a look at a series of profiles of individuals who you've seen here on Court TV, some old, some new, and talk about this connection. Let's bring in Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas, who's going to help us all night tonight. We're beginning with O.J. Simpson. And for Court TV viewers, some may they remember the trial, and that's like all they know. I want to start with O.J. Simpson before the trial and who O.J. Simpson was as a player, as an athlete.
Well, Vinny, of course, the defendant in the trial of the century that took place in the mid-90s, but before the glove didn't fit, O.J. Simpson was the juice. College football and NFL legend. So let's start his college career at the University of Southern California. NCAA rushing yards leader, 1967 and 68. Two-time unanimous All-American Heisman Trophy winner in 1968 as well. Then, of course, he goes on to go pro. Drafted first overall by the Buffalo Bills in '69, NFL MVP, player of the decade for the 70s, six-time Pro Bowler, five-time first-team All-Pro, four-time NFL rushing leader. And Vinny, of course, us football fans know him as the first NFL player to rush for 2,000 yards in a single season. Now, as far as how much money he made from football, it was a couple million. You know, they weren't paying as much back then in the 60s and 70s. But, of course, through television and his endorsement deals, his net worth grew to upwards of $10 million throughout the 1980s.
That's it, yeah. You talk about the salaries were much different, but, I mean, he wasn't sweating it, but he also had to work, right? He had to continue broadcasting, doing those Hertz commercials, et cetera, and made money from them. And back then, they really didn't track injuries and head injuries the way they do now. So let's get into now the O.J. Simpson that people may be a little bit more familiar with, people that watch Court TV. What do we know about his behavioral and criminal history?
Well, Vinny, he had 3 trials broadcast right here on the network Court TV over the course of the years. Of course, beginning in 1995, again, with that trial of the century, that murder trial involving his estranged wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and Ron Goldman. Of course, we know he was found not guilty of those murders, but let's walk down memory lane to remember some of the coverage and that controversial verdict.
From the beginning, it is referred to as the trial of the century. The people's case? O.J. Simpson killed his ex-wife, Nicole Brown, and Ron Goldman. The timeline works. The evidence is clear. The defense? Simpson has been framed. Investigators were incompetent, biased, and rushed to judgment in a way that underscores a history of systemic problems within the LAPD.
O.J. Simpson, in a knit cap from 2 blocks away, is still O.J. Simpson. It's no disguise. It's no disguise. It makes no sense. It doesn't fit. If it doesn't fit, You must acquit.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Nicole Brown Simpson, a human being, as charged in count 1 of the information. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Ronald Lyle Goldman, a human being, as charged in count 2 of the information. Juror number 8, as to count 2, is this your verdict? Yes. Juror number 9, as to count 2, is this your verdict? Juror number 10, as to count 2, is this your verdict?
So Vinny, there in 95, acquitted of those murders, but we fast forward to 1997 to the civil suit involving those murders, where O.J. was actually found liable for the wrongful deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. And then we get to 2001, Vinny. This might be a trial that people may or may not remember because it happened right a couple weeks after 9/11. This was the road rage trial, stemming from a road rage incident that happened in Miami-Dade County. Now, that trial, it carried a potential 16-year sentence. He was also found not guilty on all of those charges. And then, of course, in 2008, that armed robbery and kidnapping case from an incident in Las Vegas, where he and others took sports memorabilia at gunpoint. He was found guilty, sentenced to 33 years in prison, but granted parole and released in 2017. And of course, we now know that O.J. Simpson passed away in April of 2024.
All right, Cody Thomas is going to be with us all night. Thanks so much. And that brings us to the first question in our investigation tonight. It's about the connection. Did football impact O.J. Simpson's behavior? Here to help answer this question, Dr. Dakota Tyler, astrophysicist, physics professor, and former Division I football player, along with psychotherapist and CEO of Life Counseling Solutions, Dr. Janie Lacey. All right, Dr. Tyler, I want to begin with you. You talk about O.J. Simpson, had a long career. They didn't document the concussions and have all the protocols that they do today. But we know as a running back, he carried the ball 20 to 30 times a day, week after week, year after year. What are your thoughts about any potential connection in the way he acted after his career?
Well, you know, I think that the connection between CTE, brain damage, and this erratic behavior is pretty clear. But I think something that's also really interesting to consider when you think about young men who get good at a sport like football early on is that there potentially is sort of some emotional stunting that goes on. Whereas most people kind of have to figure out what they're going to do in life and who they are and what their identity is and how to work through their emotions. Sometimes, you know, as an athlete, you get so much positive reinforcement that it's sort of like the red carpet is just rolled out for you. And football is a really violent sport. And when that ends for players, I wonder if CTE, you know, some sort of degenerative brain condition, kind of amplifies some of the problems that are just going to be inherent with an athlete losing that identity and maybe not having developed the emotional skill set, like the tool belt, to kind of work through the challenges of life that would absolutely be a shock. You know, as your career comes to an end, you kind of go from being a superhero to not really knowing who you are.
Dr. Janie Lacey, this is a guy, right? He's found not guilty of the trial of last century, but then a couple of years later gets involved in a road rage incident. He's found not guilty there, but there was, there was an altercation, then a robbery case. Do you think there's any sort of connection? And what Dr. Tyler's talking about, if anyone was ever anointed like you are going to be fantastic, it was O.J. Simpson. From the time he was in high school, the golden boy at USC, wins the Heisman, and then becomes a movie star after his career. What are your thoughts about the connections here for O.J.?
You know, Vinny, this is I think one of the most frustrating aspects of the O.J. Simpson case is because his a state refused to donate his brain for study, right? So and that's a real loss, because it's not just about understanding Simpson, but it's about advancing the knowledge of CTE that could have helped thousands of other former players. But what we do know is compelling, right? Dr. Bennett, I believe she is the forensic pathologist who literally discovered CTE in football players and was portrayed by Will Smith in Concussion. But she had stated publicly, Vinnie, that he would bet his medical license that Simpson had CTE. And to me, that's a remarkable statement from someone who doesn't make those claims lightly. So now, do we think CTE caused any of his violent behavior? Well, that's where we have to be careful. I can't draw a straight line from suspected brain damage to the murders he was accused of, but CTE doesn't make someone commit murder, I should say. But what CTE does...
Let me throw this into the mix, though. Can I throw this into the mix for OJ? Which is jealousy, right? This isn't like random violence, the double homicide where he was found civilly liable for, but jealousy in thinking that his woman is with someone else, or the mother of his children is with someone else, and then you put that in the mix. What are your thoughts there?
Well, we can confirm with the diagnosis with CTE, the damage from the prefrontal, the frontal lobes, I should say, are essential, Vinnie, for the brain's executive control center. So these are the parts of the brain that's going to help you think through consequences, regulate your emotions, control aggressive impulses, and make sound judgment. So I can probably say that if Simpson had CTE, which seems highly probable given his football exposure and symptoms, his capacity for impulse control and sound judgment would have been significantly compromised, Vinnie.
Let me ask you, Dr. Tyler, when you start talking about this issue, do you think back about your playing days?
I absolutely do. You know, I have a long history of documented concussions. Now, I stopped playing in college, so I didn't have an extended NFL career like some of the guys that we're talking about today. But I absolutely had some concussive events. And importantly, with CTE, it's not even about those single concussive blows, but just the repetitive, play-by-play ramming into other people at really high speeds. So that's something that I absolutely was concerned about. I'm an astrophysicist. I recently got my PhD. And while I was studying in grad school, I did have a period of time where I just felt it was really difficult to focus. And I didn't know if that was because maybe I was having some CTE symptoms, or maybe the material is just really hard. And I ended up getting a consult with the neurology department here at UCLA, where I was at for grad school. And they said that I didn't really have the symptoms of CTE, but it was rather ADHD. And I can tell you that aside from that, I know that myself, after finishing my football career, I have had to kind of like go back and do some emotional work that just didn't get done. And I suspect a large part of that was because I was an athlete. So when you bring up a question like dealing with jealousy, jealousy is a complex emotion that all of us feel. And most of us over time, as we get older, learn to deal with it better. We figure out how we can sort of assess or adapt our behavior and not let our emotions control us. And for somebody who perhaps maybe didn't ever have to develop that, you're always told yes, you always get whatever you want. You're OJ, you're the juice. And leveraging any sort of CTE, if there's any sort of magnification of mental health disease or degenerative brain disease, I can only imagine that something like CTE would possibly play a role. I like what the doctor said, we don't know conclusively because nobody looked at the brain, so it couldn't be confirmed. But I can tell you, from my own experience, it's something that I absolutely have worried about. And there's no real way to know if I have it or not.
Right. Yeah, that's the unfortunate part of all this. All right, coming up next, did football impact Aaron Hernandez's behavior?
Do you think you deserve to die for murdering those innocent people?
You tell me.
Can you see how damning that evidence is? How do you explain that?
My goal is to make sure that you remember me for the rest of your life.
Oh, my God. It looks more like fury than fear.
I felt guilty for that.
You felt guilty because, frankly, you were guilty.
Interview with a Killer. Marathon starting Friday, 5/4 Central. Only on Court TV.
Here's another player that Court TV viewers may be familiar with. You may not recognize him in his Gator uniform, but his name is Aaron Hernandez, who was the second highest profile client of Jose Baez, who went to trial for murder and was found not guilty. There he is. He was a member of the New England Patriots. Let's bring back in Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas, still with us. All right, Cody, folks sort of remember that. He was found not guilty. It was, again, kind of shocking for many. But tell us a little bit more about the background of Aaron Hernandez before he becomes an accused and then convicted criminal.
Well, yeah, Vinny, before his legal issues, Aaron Hernandez was one of the best tight ends to ever touch a football field, beginning in high school, going through his college career at Florida, on through his short NFL career with the New England Patriots. But we begin at the University of Florida. He was there from 2007 to 2010. He received the John Mackey Award, which is an award given out to the best tight end in the country during a particular season. First team All-American, first team All-SEC, BCS National Champion, and SEC Champion. And Vinny, you got to remember, this is the Tim Tebow, Cam Newton, A.J. McCarron, Aaron Murray era, so the SEC was real hot back then. He was drafted by the Patriots, played 3 seasons alongside none other than Tom Brady, Pro Bowl selection, AFC champion, a Super Bowl appearance. But of course, his career gets cut short due to that arrest. Now, throughout his career, the 3 years, Vinny, he made around $18 million, but right before his arrest, he had just signed a $40 million extension, but of course, that wasn't paid out in full due to the legality of his arrest.
Yeah, okay, yeah, so making real money. Like, this is superstar money, right? So tell us about his now criminal and behavioral history.
Well, Vinny, he was the subject of a popular Netflix documentary. Let's take a look at a couple of clips from that first.
No one has allegedly murdered 2 people and then played an entire season as a professional athlete. Patriots reward him with a $40 million contract.
Aaron Hernandez was a ticking time bomb.
New England Patriot Aaron Hernandez was arrested this morning at his residence.
Aaron was accused of murdering Odin Lloyd, his future brother-in-law.
How can an individual who has everything get involved in something like this?
Vinny, heard them call him a ticking time bomb there. So we'll start in 2007 when he's still at the University of Florida, kind of walking through his behavior, some of his criminal background here. He had a couple altercations at college bars, fights, and things like that. He was questioned at one point in 2007 by the Gainesville police after a shooting occurred that injured 2 people. He was not charged in that. In 2010, after entering the NFL draft, he admitted to failing 1 drug test in college, so that was a little, a drop of oil in his glass of water. February 2013, Aaron's friend Alexander Bradley files a lawsuit alleging Aaron shot him in the face at a Miami strip club. June 2013, the body of Odin Lloyd, who we just saw in that clip, was found near Aaron's Massachusetts mansion. Now, Lloyd was dating Aaron's fiance's sister. Now, at some point in that time, Aaron destroys his cell phone and home surveillance footage. Late June of 2013, Aaron is cuffed and arrested at his home and charged with the first-degree murder of Odin Lloyd and 5 firearms violations. About a year later, May 2014, he's indicted on 2 more counts of first-degree murder from a 2012 drive-by shooting. April of 2015, he is found guilty of first-degree murder of Odin Lloyd and sentenced to life behind bars. Now, almost 2 years later, February of 2017, he goes on trial for that 2012 double murder. He is acquitted of those charges, Vinny, but 2 months later, in April of 2017, we now know that he was found hanging in his cell after taking his own life.
All right, thanks so much, Cody. Brings us to the next question about Aaron Hernandez. Did football impact Aaron Hernandez's behavior here? Still helping us out, Dr. Dakota Tyler, astrophysicist, physics professor, former Division I football player and psychotherapist, CEO of Life Counseling Solutions, Dr. Janie Lacey. Dr. Janie Lacey, I'll start with you first. In the way these injuries could manifest themselves, does suicide fall into that bucket of behaviors?
Yes, when we look at CTE, and do we know that he had it? Absolutely. And that suicide is, when we look at CTE, it's strongly associated with depression and suicide behavior. And we look at 11.7%, Vinny, I believe, are among the rates of people that have CTE attempt suicide and commit suicide.
Dr. Dakota Tyler, your thoughts about Aaron Hernandez. This is one where we do know that he suffered from CTE, but you look at the behavior. I mean, it started in college, you know, this alleged outrageous behavior.
Yeah, it seems like over time he was getting increasingly violent and erratic with his behavior. That also sounds consistent with what I've heard coaches and like family members and friends say about him as well. So that, I think, is no surprise that they found CTE when they looked at his brain.
Yeah, and Dr. Janie Lacey, Aaron Hernandez sort of became the public poster child because of the extreme violence and the crimes he was accused of. Can it take someone who is bad and make them worse, or does it take people who are normal and make them bad?
I would say with Aaron, perhaps, you know, environmental factors, but then it kind of created this escalation. But I think what strikes me most about Aaron's case, Vinny, is that all his symptoms were treatable. I mean, they were treatable. His impulsivity, his aggression, his mood dysregulation, his depression, that we have therapeutic interventions for all of those. And the sad part is that no one connected the dots that someone, a young man who has been bashing his head since the age 8, may have had brain damage affecting his behavior and mental health, Vinny.
And Dr. Tyler, we have about 30 seconds left here before we run out of time, but do you think there's much more of a conversation these days among players, even college players?
I definitely think that there is. It's obviously something that people are aware of now. I think the NFL was sort of trying to stifle it at first, which is what was portrayed in the movie Concussion. But I think it's something that absolutely people are aware of now, and hopefully it becomes even more of a conversation for athletes.
Absolutely. I want to thank you both for your valuable time. Dr. Dakota Tyler, Dr. Janie Lacey, we'll see you again soon. Still to come, did football impact Kellen Winslow II's behavior? I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of football stars and millionaires who have ended up in court charged with crimes. Is there a connection between football and their behavior? Here's the story. The NFL's highlight reels never show the aftermath, the arrests, the mugshots, the shattered families. Yet the league's history is lined with stars whose public life collapsed under the weight of criminal charges. From assaults to DUIs to unthinkable acts of violence, we've seen it all here at Court TV. Researchers now believe many of these players weren't just troubled. They were injured on a level no one could see. CTE, the brain-ravaging disease caused by years of impacts, may have quietly distorted judgment, amplified aggression, and pushed vulnerable athletes towards disaster. Is there a connection to the country's most popular sport and the men who end up in legal trouble? It is. It's such a fall from grace, right? You're football heroes. You're millionaires. You have great lives, and then the lives come tumbling down. And tonight we're taking a look at see if there's some sort of connection here between the sport that made them so famous, that made them so rich, that has a part in their downfall. Let's check back in with Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas. We're talking now about Kellen Winslow II. And when we relaunched Court TV II, it was the second trial we showed everyone. Before we get to his criminal matters, let's talk about Kellen Winslow II as a football player.
Well, Vinny, he was the son of Kellen Winslow I, a Chargers legend, NFL Hall of Famer. But the second, Kellen Winslow, was pretty good himself, and he has his career at the University of Miami, where he was a BCS national champion. He also got that John Mackey Award for best tight end in the country, a unanimous All-American. And while there, Vinny, at the University of Miami, he set school records for a tight end in a single season for most receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. He was no joke on the field. Now, his professional career, 6th overall pick in the 2004 NFL Draft. He played 10 seasons in the NFL with multiple teams. He had a Pro Bowl selection. He also set a single-season franchise record for a tight end for most receptions and receiving yards with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, Vinny, his career earnings were upwards of $43 million throughout those 10 seasons.
That's enough money where you can live a very nice, comfortable life after retirement, but that's not what happened here. Tell us what you know about his behavioral and criminal history.
Yeah, Vinny, so like you mentioned, that was another trial broadcast right here on the network on Court TV. His criminal history extends over a span of 2 decades, from 2003 to 2019, involving sex crimes of very, very vulnerable victims. But take a listen to him saying that he was innocent.
Is there anything you want to say to your fans out there and everybody that's out there?
Yeah, man, I'm innocent, you know. To the people that know me out there, know what type of person I am, you know, my character, my NFL friends and family, and just my regular friends and family. They know who I am, and I'm an innocent guy. It's a money grab. It's a money grab, and unfortunately, that's the society we live in now.
Well, Vinny, it wasn't a money grab, because he's now currently serving a 14-year sentence after striking this kind of complex plea deal that involved him pleading guilty to some heavy sex crimes. I'm going to walk through some of those convictions. Forcible rape of a 58-year-old homeless woman. Rape of an unconscious teenager in 2003. Assault with intent to commit rape of a 54-year-old hitchhiker. Indecent exposure to a woman in her garden, and lewd conduct involving a 77-year-old woman in a gym. Take a listen to him admitting to some of these things in court, Vinny.
You do admit that you committed those acts that make you guilty of count 6?
Yes.
All right. And then with respect to the amended added count number 9, which is the sexual battery, the factual basis states as follows. I touched an intimate part of Jane Doe number 1 while she was restrained in fear against her will for the purpose of sexual arousal. Do you admit that you committed those acts that make you guilty of count 9?
Yes.
All right.
Now, Vinny, he was initially arrested in 2018 for burglary after a neighbor reported him breaking into a mobile home where he claimed he was looking for a dog. Now, he's had legal battles since he's been locked up to try to reduce his sentence, but a judge has denied all of those. So he's still behind bars.
Yeah, and that's someone who has a documented history with concussions through his career. And that brings us to the next question in our investigation. Did football impact Kellen Winslow's behavior? Kellen Winslow II. Not Kellen Winslow, his father, the Hall of Famer, but the Hall of Famer's son. Here to help answer that question, board-certified neurologist Dr. Jeremy Liff and high-profile civil and criminal defense lawyer John Phillips. He's represented many high-profile cases, including Joe Exotic, star of the Netflix series Tiger King, and Omarosa. Okay, Dr. Jeremy Liff, let me begin with you. I look at, and I watched his trial. He was a deeply disturbed man. The crimes, sex crimes, the victims, older, and in some cases much older women. But there was also one dating back to 2003 who was sort of someone of the same age when he was a younger man. What are your thoughts about the impact that football can have, and can it manifest itself into the world of sex crimes?
Well, that's a tough question to ask, and obviously, having not been able to understand the entirety of his history, including from growing up as a boy, it's difficult to make a total diagnosis. But when I reviewed his case, to be perfectly honest with you, my opinion is it's not particularly consistent with what I would think about for someone who becomes criminal with CTE. And the reason I say that is that a lot of his cases seem very premeditated. In fact, I remember the prosecution saying that he picked his victims based on who he thought he could get away with and not be discovered. And then, in fact, he even denied what he did. To me, that's not consistent with CTE, because in CTE, with frontal lobe dysfunction, you're going to have a lack of planning. You're going to have you're going to have violent outbursts, spontaneous outbursts. This seemed very premeditated. It may very well be that he has had changes like many football players who've taken a lot of head blows that are consistent with CTE, but people with CTE who do horrible things don't usually then deny it. They might say, I had no control over myself, but to go out and say I didn't do any of these things when clearly he was convicted, that to me is not particularly consistent in my opinion.
Yeah, that's incredible insight, Doctor. Thanks so much for that. John Phillips, so, you know, when football players get in trouble now, we inevitably expect to hear the letters CTE discussed. What are your thoughts about how that may, because I think even Kellen Winslow II is attempting to do some of that to mitigate some of his time. What are your thoughts about that?
First of all, CTE is very real. I get calls from athletes all the time who are caught up in a different situation, including insufficient work by the NFLPA to help athletes. And what we have with Kellen Winslow, and I stole this from the doctor's office, is both, you know, the CTE from the coup contra coup injury. I do think it is impactful, but the nurture. So you got nature and nurture. You know, he was nurtured in a very toxic situation once he went to the U. You know, once he led, you know, was a part of the Miami lifestyle and the motorcycles and all the things that Miami offers its young players, particularly coming out of the 90s into the 2000s. And so, you know, Jeremy Shockey, while not classic CTE, certainly I think the traumatic repetitive head injuries had some impact, but you know, if you compare him and his father, and it's not a long comparison, his father was late to football, worked his way through, and you know, the second just kind of came in on the arc, wound up at Miami, and always, even though he professes his innocence, had a track record that was controversial and problematic.
Let me ask you, Doctor, will we get better at figuring out what's going on with some of these athletes prior to them dying and being able to examine their brains?
I certainly hope so. I mean, because as you know, and as the doctors discussed, the only way to make a diagnosis is post-mortem on an autopsy. And there are some clues on, let's say, MRIs where parts of the brain can have shrunk, but there's really no definitive way to make that diagnosis. And if you combine that MRI with clinical features, maybe you have a suspicion. For the sake of all of these guys who are putting their livelihoods on the line, much better diagnosis and hopefully much better treatment is coming down the road. There certainly should be a lot of research put into it, because you have your heart goes out to all of these guys. Most of them obviously haven't committed violent crimes. They're just living very tough lives after the sport that they played.
All right, guests are staying with us. Coming up next, a new case. Did football impact Antonio Brown's behavior?
The disappearance of mother Anna Walsh.
Her husband now charged with her murder.
All eyes on this accused killer.
Mr. Walsh was suspecting his wife of having an affair.
The massive trail of evidence.
This incredible timeline of Google searches.
It shows everything that was in his mind.
He searched how long before a body starts to smell.
The disappearance of Anna Walsh murder trial. Live coverage begins December 1st on Court TV.
This case is clearly overcharged as an attempted second-degree murder. Even the judge said, at worst, we're talking about aggravated assault. Secondly, we have a strong self-defense case. He has a long history with this violent, convicted felon.
There it is, our latest in a string through the years of high-profile star football players and Court TV. That's Antonio Brown. Still here helping us is Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas. All right, tell the folks at home who may not be familiar with Antonio Brown a little bit about him.
Well, Vinny, he's one of the modern era's best wide receivers until he walked off the field in 2022 abruptly mid-game. Now, he didn't go to a big-name school like some of the others we've spoken about tonight, but he went to Central Michigan University, but he had an expansive NFL career. 7-time Pro Bowler, 2-time NFL receptions leader, NFL 2010's All-Decade Team, a Super Bowl champ alongside Tom Brady with the Buccaneers, with earnings, Vinny, just from football, upwards of $80 to $90 million. Serious money.
That's a big career. All right, let's talk about his behavioral and criminal history. You mentioned him sort of ending his career by just walking out in the middle of a game. What do we know about his history?
Well, it all starts back in 2019, Vinny, where he sued over some sexual abuse allegations, sexual misconduct allegations, where he settled with the accuser. Now we go to 2020, where he pleaded no contest to felony burglary with battery, burglary of an unoccupied conveyance, and criminal mischief relating to a moving truck driver outside of his home. For that, he was given a 2-year probation and community service hours. Now, Vinny, what we were just talking about in 2022, abruptly walks off the field in the middle of a game between the Jets and Buccaneers. He just throws the peace sign up and just leaves mid-game. Hasn't returned, by the way. 2023, arrested on allegations of failing to pay child support, and what we were just talking about as well, 2025, arrested for attempted murder from an incident outside of a celebrity boxing match where a gun was fired. He has since bailed out. Now we're waiting for developments on that one. But Vinny, we have video, a clip of the altercation outside of that celebrity boxing match. It was posted on the platform X by user Simo Sadi. Let's take a look. So, Vinny, you saw him running there. You see the still image there. You heard the 2 shots fired. This picture here circulating the internet with what we have circled, what people think is the gun that he was holding. Now, we have another clip, Vinny. After this alleged shooting, he joined the popular streamer Aiden Ross on the platform Kick during a live stream. Now, a clip from this live stream was posted on X by an account called Video Mixtape. But again, it is a clip from the streamer Aiden Ross on the platform Kick. Let's take a look.
Yeah, I got CT. I blacked out. I ain't know what happened. Blacked out, dude. I blacked out, Aiden. I know you did. I know what happened. I know. Your eyes, man.
They thought you was getting drunk, so he tried to like pull y'all apart.
I slammed again.
Hey, you kicked him in his.
Yeah.
He was like, "What the?" I was trying to help.
I was like, "Oh." He would run through anybody when you used to play. Just saying, bro. Security not gonna hold AB back, bro.
So I don't know there, Vinny. Seems to be making light of the situation during that live stream. Now, important to note, that stream is no longer posted on Aiden Ross's Kick platform as of today.
All right, Cody Thomas, thanks for all your help tonight. Brings us to our final question in our investigation this evening. Did football impact Antonio Brown's behavior? Which obviously not to the extreme of O.J. Simpson, not to the extreme of Kellen Winslow II, or the extreme of Aaron Hernandez, but significant nonetheless. He's charged with second-degree attempted murder at this point. Still with us, neurologist Dr. Jeremy Liff and high-profile civil and criminal defense lawyer John Phillips. John, let me ask you first, there's a question, because as attorney Mark Eiglarsh, I've had him on my show millions of times, good friend of mine, is talking about self-defense in this case. You look at a story in a case like this, and I know we're talking about the connection to football. Do you think that trouble is finding him, or he's finding trouble? Because he's a football star, does trouble come to him? Or do you think because he's retired now or something's going on that he somehow is finding trouble?
You know, Antonio Brown's problem is somewhere between here and here. And he's always been that guy. And when asked about CTE years ago, he was like, no, clearly I have no signs of CTE. And now he's making a joke about it on a podcast. The one decision he's made right, and you know him and I know him, was to hire Mark Eiglarsh, who's is just a positive guy and a positive lawyer, and will help rebrand that around a jury. But I'm not going with the repetitive head trauma theory here. They can certainly show video of him getting, absolutely knocked unconscious by Vontez Burfict, I think his name is, in that wild card game in 2016 that we all remember. But, he's always had controversy and trouble surrounding him. And this isn't just, repetitive head trauma. This is just, to some extent, who he is. And when you give somebody like this money and power, sometimes it just corrupts the individual, and here we are. And I work in Florida. I've helped work on the stand your ground laws in Florida. I've tried self-defense cases, and he runs towards trouble. He could have gone away. You can't retreat and come back with a gun and that be self-defense. But here we go.
Here we go. Exactly. Dr. Jeremy Liff, I wanted to ask you a question that's somewhat related to this, but may not be directly related. And I think it expands on what we were talking about already, which is as we see football players getting in trouble, suddenly those letters sort of become part of the conversation time and time again. Is there a way, or will there be a way for doctors, do you believe, to go into a courtroom and provide an opinion on a living, breathing individual on whether or not they are exhibiting signs consistent with suffering from CTE to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
I think probably there would be a time where you could, as a doctor or as a neurologist, say that the preponderance of the evidence points to this, especially if you saw a very large change in behavior. Obviously, with what we were talking about before, if we could have much better diagnostic tools, that someone who's an expert at interpreting those tools could then really get on the stand and make an opinion one way or the other. But I guess it's up to the lawyers to know how valuable that kind of testimony would be. Right now, you can only really speculate clinically as to whether or not there is a lot of injury in the frontal lobes. I can tell you with him, he definitely has frontal lobe dysfunction. I mean, if you told me he was normal 20 years ago, he'd be a pretty good candidate. But again, I not knowing him personally, because he's doing a lot of disinhibited, spontaneously lunatic type behavior, which makes no sense for anyone involved and is very injurious.
Yeah, including the way he ended his career. I mean, he just walked away from millions of dollars, just like took his shirt off in the middle of the game. John Phillips, let's just finish up here and pick up on what I was asking Dr. Liff about, which is, do you see, because it's not just football, right? It's all sports. It could be cheerleading. It can be from any of these sort of contact, repetitive sports. Do you see a time where perhaps it becomes part of a mental disease or defect defense, CTE, in a courtroom?
I think it could. Right now, even in some of the recent cases, courts aren't inclined to allow CTE. There's other brain trauma and injury to kind of lessen or explain the situation. I just don't think it's going to be a get out of jail free card. It's not going to be the insanity defense, because at some point, these are still millionaires who are functioning in a very posh world and have an environment around them that look into OJ and the other cases we've discussed. You've discussed Hernandez.
We are out of time. I hate cutting you off, John, but I'm up against it.
I'm going to take my clothes off and leave.
John Phillips, Dr. Jeremy Liff, thank you both so much. Trying to understand whether or not there's a connection between playing football and the physical damage it can cause is an important conversation, especially when it comes to criminal behavior. While it's not a defense to the crimes, it may explain why men who have it all can seemingly throw it all away. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.